This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. There's a scene at the end of Animal House where Kevin Bacon's character attempts to calm a panicked crowd by saying all is well. He keeps saying it, and he eventually gets flattened by the stampede. At the 100-day mark of President Donald Trump's second term, the president, the White House, and all of its Republican allies, hither and yon in Congress and elsewhere, insist everything is great. But the economy is contracting, with gross domestic product declining in the first quarter of the year. Consumer confidence is falling. The stock market is turning in its worst performance for a president's first 100 days in half a century, and public polling is showing a dip in Trump's approval rating.
Remain calm. All is well.
The president just concluded a cabinet meeting as we are recording this, just a little bit before we started recording this, and has been doing some public remarks, notably in Macomb County, Michigan, earlier this week to mark the 100 days. And John Bennett, our White House correspondent and editor-at-large here at Roll Call, has been covering it all. John, welcome back to Political Theater.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
So where to start? I mean, your main bar for Roll Call earlier this week about the 100 days of the administration, taking as we like to do the viewpoint of what this means for the White House in relation to Congress was I thought if I do say so on behalf of you, a nice take that. Regardless of where Trump is right now or where he might be in the coming years, his first 100 days has shown future presidents how they can get around Congress, how they can evade Congress through executive orders, through ignoring court orders, through kind of steamrolling people and sort of moving fast, if you will, and not really worrying about like kind of normal procedures. Yesterday, as I mentioned in the lead up here, he was in Michigan in Macomb County. This like the sort of prototypical swing district, right? I mean, this is outside of Detroit, and it kind of goes back and forth, in terms of who they prefer in presidential elections and statewide elections. It tends to go back and forth to who they elect to the House. So it's a great example of a place that a politician wants to be in tune with. And certainly the Democratic governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who was there with the president, was attuned to that as well as the president and his team. But let's talk about what Trump, Trump was saying in that appearance in his 100 days, and then also in the cabinet meeting, and how it is slightly at odds with some of the numbers, that I mentioned that we'll get into in a little bit more detail. But first, let's talk about Macomb and your takeaways from that speech.
Well, yeah, you mentioned Governor Whitmer. That was one of the most striking things. She was at the airport, when President Trump landed on Tuesday afternoon. She was with him at the Air National Guard base, and they work together. Their administrations work together. When you want to save a guard base, especially more than an active duty base, and I covered defense for a long time, you have to find a mission. And if your mission's going away or being relocated, you got to find a new mission. Well, they worked together and they got that done. And the base is going to stay open. Governor Whitmer spoke. Trump called her over. She spoke behind the blue presidential lectern yesterday, and she chose her words very carefully. She never thanked President Trump directly. At the very end, she turned and said, and I something like, I thank everyone for all the work. And she was kind of looking in his direction. So that's about as close as you get when you might want to be the Democratic nominee in 2028. So that was an interesting takeaway early in the afternoon. But from there, what really struck me was the celebratory tone of the rally in Macomb County, and just this stiff arming away of any data points, which I know you have some. I pulled a bunch of numbers myself for a story that that we'll publish later today, later on Wednesday, and they're not favorable for Trump and the administration. The economy is not trending in the right direction. But yesterday at the rally last evening, I mean, I was looking back at a transcript just a few minutes ago during the never ending cabinet meeting. And, he's using phrases like we've already defeated inflation. I just pulled the inflation rate. Now it's down, but it's still there. It's about 2.5% for March, and we don't have the April data yet. The consumer confidence index, I believe today, not great. The stock market's down again today off the latest GDP numbers, which are negative for the first time, I believe, since the first quarter of 2022. That's a long time ago.
Yep,
And this
3 years.
this is all related. Right. That's good math there, Jason. 3 years.
I was told there would be no math, so anytime I can get it in there,
I could do. Yeah, better than I could do. So all these trends are related, of course, to the tariff program and his other economic policies. It also struck me last night, he's still on this. This isn't just about tariffs and his feeling that America has been treated unfairly, even by its allies on trade. By the way, a lot of Democrats agree with that. They just disagree with how he's gone about this. But it's about a remake of the economy. He envisions you and I, Jason, if this magical journalism ride ends, maybe we end our working days at a factory somewhere here or wherever we end up after that ride might end. His people have talked about these fired federal workers going to work in these new manufacturing facilities. And he called, when he announced the tariffs on April 9th, I was in the very chilly Rose Garden, and he called up an auto worker from the Detroit area who said, "Mr. President, we have factories that just need to be, the production lines inside the facilities just need to be retrofitted, and we're ready to go to work. Detroit is ready to go to work, Mr. President." And Trump 5 minutes later says, "Forget those factories. We're going to raise them and build brand new ones." Everyone listening knows how long that would take. I'm not an engineer or real estate guy or anything. It would take probably a decade to get all that done, and I'm being generous. So that's what struck me, is he's still on this remake of the economy. And if you look at our friends at the Pew Research Center did some polling, 80-something% of Americans think the country should make more stuff. 20% of Americans actually want to do those jobs.
Right. Yeah, it's not the idea of going from I think the term is like gray collar job, is service industry. It's not so much white collar, not blue collar, but like a service industry job, to going into the like the steel mills, or something. I mean, that I'm a big movie buff, John, and I'm pretty sure that you've seen the movie The Deer Hunter. At the beginning of the movie, there's this great scene, from inside a steel mill where all, the characters, the main characters you're being introduced to, are performing, this like horrifyingly difficult and dangerous and strenuous work with pouring like working with steel and iron coke and molten products and so forth. And I just think a lot of Americans are probably not super psyched about like that, thinking that may be their future after they've were told 30 years ago, learn to program computers and learn to use a spreadsheet and learn how to analyze financial data or so forth. That these factories that they're building in other countries faster with lower labor costs are the way that we're going to deal with that. Now, again, I understand the argument that they're making, that that was a mistake, and that we need to reprogram the economy here. Like whatever its merits, it will take time. And I've got the numbers in a little bit more detail too. So again, as you mentioned, gross domestic product down 0.3% in the first quarter of 2025. That's the first time that there's been a contraction since the first quarter of 2022. The S&P 500 down 7.3% in the first 100 days of this administration. That's the worst 100-day performance for a new administration in 50 years. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 6.8%. That's the worst for the first 100 days since 1973. Richard Nixon, 52 years. The NASDAQ is down 11%. That's the worst 100 days since 2001 under George W. Bush, when we were in the middle of a dot-com bust. And the Conference Board Index, Consumer Confidence Index, says that it is declined. Consumer confidence has declined for the fifth straight month, and it is its lowest level in 13 years. So regardless of the merits of whether this will work or not, the markets and employers and people are not feeling it. And also the public polling for the president continues to go down. His aggregated poll numbers are at this point like the worst for a president going back, more than 30 years. I mean, usually you get a honeymoon. There is no honeymoon. It's kind of over. So the public isn't really buying it either. His hardcore supporters, they will love him no matter what.
That's right.
The independents who elected him, they're not buying it.
Yeah, there's a YouTube, and our old friends at The Economist have a poll out this week. And the Trump's approval rating is, I believe, 43% against 54% disapproval. And what stuck out to me in that YouGov poll was independents on Trump's handling of the economy and jobs. 32% approve of his handling of those two things. And I think it was something like 56% disapprove, or it might even be a little more than that. So, independents really pushed him across the finish line in those swing states. He loves to brag about those 7 swing states, and fair enough. He won them all. But it was independents and a lot of people who had voted for Joe Biden in 2020 had just grown frustrated for whatever reason, or maybe watched too much certain cable channels, and became convinced that things weren't maybe as good as they were. And I think Biden had a point on the way out, they couldn't message anything, but the economy was fundamentally strong, and he was. I mean, I think that's a fact for those of us who still look at data and actually believe it. So they just couldn't message it, and they had a hard time explaining to regular folks that maybe they were better off than when Trump left office. So that number with independents has got to be very worrying to every House Republican. Maybe not some in super safe districts, but the Mike Lawlers of the world. He always comes to front of my mind. He's a Republican from a swingy district in New York State. Folks like that have to be really concerned, and of course, a lot of the Senate Republicans who were up for re-election. That was supposed to be an easy map for them in next year's midterm elections. And if Trump's polling data continues to go this way, that could really impact those races. But one thing where people are also going to feel this is, and I'll just take my own personal experience. I needed to look at I call them the big three, my retirement investment accounts for some personal planning I was doing. And it's not that they're down since April 9th. It's that they're just kind of stuck in the mud. They're playing 500 ball when, trust me, I would like them to be playing, like 650 ball or better. And they were playing pretty good ball there for a while. And, the value, I think I'm, kind of back to April 10th, April 11th levels, but it's just kind of a flat line. And that's where people could really get upset with the president, is when they, I got brave enough this morning to check mine. And when Americans get brave enough to log into their accounts, that everyone wants to retire eventually, right?
Right. And I think that the broader point there too is that, like, let's say that the stock market recovers, to levels that it was at in January, sometime in the next few months. That's still like a loss. That's still a loss for us, because for anybody who has retirement. And again, I can already hear some of the counter arguments, which is that, well, you guys are by definition elites if you're talking about having 401ks and retirements in equities, because that's what wealthy people or upper middle class people have. Fair point. But like, I saw another, here's another stat from today. UPS is going to lay off 20,000 drivers. specifically because there are fewer packages coming in from Amazon. Uh, and again, Amazon got kind of pilloried yesterday in the White House by the White House press secretary, Kellyanne Leavitt, because they were just going to list there was a report that they were going to list their prices, like, and how much they were going up because of tariffs from China, because China manufactures a lot of things that people buy. And so if we're already starting to see enough of a downgrade in terms of things that are delivered to us from China, to the point where they're laying off 20,000 UPS workers, those are like blue collar workers. That's not like the effete liberal media, that we stratosphere that we are occupying, you and me, John, and our colleagues who are worried about our 401ks. And also, more people have 401ks than ever before. So it's always a good idea to check on that, because as we've seen with the current administration's targeting of Social Security offices, we may, there may be changes to that august retirement program too. So it's the level of uncertainty that's going on. Again, it's reflected in the numbers. It's reflected in private employers. It's reflected through consumer behavior. It's reflected in the stock market, and it's reflected in public polling. And yet, if you tuned into that cabinet meeting, it's a pretty laughy bunch, of people, and everybody's doing a great job. They have their Gulf of America hats right in front of them. Everybody's laughing and giggling and talking about how, what a wonderful job they're doing, and everything's just going to be just super fine. And on Capitol Hill, as we speak, they're marking up reconciliation instructions that is the centerpiece of the president's agenda to cut taxes and to cut like a significant amount of federal spending for which people, particularly middle class, lower middle class, and poor people depend on, such as Medicaid. So this whole thing seems like there is a little bit of dissonance, if you will. And that's the thing about politics. They always eventually people come around. I think my question is, Trump, it's not really Trump style to say, like, you're right, we screwed up. I don't think we're ever going to hear anything like that. But blaming sleepy Joe Biden will only get you so far, which he took a swipe at Biden again, who's, been out of office for months now. This is now the Trump administration. And what happens with public polling? I don't know. Like it seems like there isn't that much of an appetite even to talk about it among congressional Republicans as they look at this multi-trillion-dollar, tax cut and, reconciliation bill.
Yeah, when I've talked to, and our colleagues have asked congressional Republicans about all of this, they just say that this is necessary, and for the most part, they're willing to give the tariffs some time. You've got Tom Tillis from my home state of North Carolina. He's concerned about the farmers. It's a huge industry back in North Carolina. So Tillis has gone a little further than a lot of congressional Republicans in lightly criticizing Trump. Even Tillis, though, is like, I'll give it a shot, but I have my concerns, and he's trying to talk to Trump as much as he can about that. But they're on board. They're not raising concerns. They go. I just saw a couple this morning on cable news saying that everything's great, the economy is going to be just fine, and that President Trump is right in looking at this long-term remake of things and this long-term kind of rebalancing act with friends and foes alike on trade. Where tariffs and trade goes, it's really anybody's guess. We learned yesterday, I believe that was yesterday. It's all one big day anymore. It's the same
Right.
day. That Secretary Bessent, Secretary of the Treasury, announced that he thinks he's the lead negotiator, especially for the Asia region, that part of the world. He said India is probably first with a trade deal, and then maybe South Korea or Japan. He said those, from his perspective, are the three that are closest. But beyond that, it's really anybody's guess. The president said at that rally you mentioned in Michigan that this could be a preview of where the tariff rates end up, that America's friends had been worse to her than its allies than its adversaries like China. So, who knows where this ends up. I've always wondered if, this deadline for the reciprocal tariffs of July 9th, if Trump might drag us all into the very steamy rose garden on, I don't know, July 8th and, announce 10% for everybody, 8% for the UK, 70% for China, and I'm moving on to the next thing. And that might be a way out of this. And that would be, and I've floated this with a couple sources who say I might not be far off, but they don't really know where this is going either. And a lot of Democrats couldn't really argue with that because Democrats have called for targeted, very strategic tariffs, and a lot of Democrats would have a hard time messaging against that because they've wanted things to be a little more fair for U.S. workers and U.S. goods. So we don't know. That's one possible way that Trump could find out of this, and he's going to have to find a way out of this. Otherwise, the congressional map next year just really gets just shaken up like puzzle pieces in the box.
I was thinking an Etch-a-Sketch, maybe. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, that puzzle works for. Well, John, I'll let you get back to this, but thanks for kind of walking us through it. I mean, again, 100 days. I've never been like a huge fan of like pegging everything to 100 days, but this is when we do take stock, and I think it was actually a good exercise to say this is where we're at this stage. It's roughly we got a lot of the data from the first quarter and so forth. So there we are, and there's this next month will be in May is going to be a big one because of so much of the reconciliation package will come together, particularly in the House. And we'll see, and that's kind of the agenda. And depending on the reaction from how things go, because of this latest like sort of slew of numbers, could get really interesting. So thanks.
It could. And Trump said yesterday that he, as of Wednesday, day 101, he was elevating, and I guess his priority power rankings, the reconciliation bill to number one. He hasn't really been that directly involved, and we've seen this before when he gets involved with congressional matters. Boy, it can get really turbulent. He's not always a solutions-based guy, and so when he, when he's trying to stand between Chip Roy or Thomas Massey and Susan Collins to get the votes, that could get really dicey.
Calls to mind the mortal words of George W. Bush that he's a uniter, not a divider, right?
We shall see.
All right. Do you want to stick around for the word of the week?
Sure.
All right. It's a good one. We have bandied around this word a little bit. It became a little bit more perhaps real to people with some of these numbers that we talked about, and that's recession. So recession has a lot of different definitions. I think one of the more core definitions that we see from a lot of people, from even economists, from politicians and so forth, is that a recession happens when there are two consecutive quarters where there is a contraction in the economy. So this would be the first quarter, and if the second quarter has a contraction, then that meets the textbook definition, quote unquote, of a recession. But it's not quite that spelled out. So I'm going to read from the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is where most federal planning and so forth comes from, what a lot of economists base their own definitions and projections on. And it's right on their page. What is a recession? The National Bureau of Economic Research traditional definition of recession is that it is a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and that lasts more than a few months. The committee's view is that while each of the three criteria, depth, diffusion, and duration, needs to be met individually to some degree, extreme conditions revealed by one criterion may partially offset weaker indications from another. And the example they give is in the case of February 2020. There was a peak in economic activity right before the COVID pandemic sort of took over. The committee concluded that the drop in activity had been so great and so widely diffused through the economy in March and April that the downturn should be classified as a recession, even if it proved to be quite brief. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind, is that we have this, I've always thought of it as the 2 quarters thing, but if it's calamitous enough, like it was in the early days of COVID, that can mean a recession. I also wanted to just note, like in plainer English from the Conference Board, we talked about their consumer confidence index earlier, that recessions are sometimes summarized as 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, but the determination actually requires analysis of many factors, and the length of a recession could be shorter or longer than 2 quarters. So that is the word of the week: recession. And thank you very much for tuning in. We're happy to be back after that recess layoff. We've got, as we stated earlier, a busy few weeks and summer coming up of political activity. And John Bennett will be there to chronicle a lot of it. We'll have him back on. In the meantime, please tell your friends about this podcast. Rate it on Apple Podcasts. Spread the word for wherever it is you get our podcast. And we'll see you next time.